The night was quiet, but Malik felt a storm inside his chest. The street around him was empty, stretching into a long, lonely path under the dim glow of broken streetlights. The wind was cold, brushing against his skin like a warning. He tried to walk calmly, carrying only his backpack and the weight of another long day. But the world around him felt too still, too watchful. It was the kind of silence that always made him uneasy, the kind that held memories of moments he wished he could forget. Behind him, a sudden flash of blue and red lights cut through the darkness. The bright colors danced across the walls, sharp and unforgiving. Malik froze for a second. His heart pushed against his ribs, beating fast, almost painful. He had seen these lights before. He knew what they meant. He knew they were not here for safety. They were here for him. The police car rolled to a slow stop, its engine humming like a warning growl. Malik didn't need to turn around to understand what was coming. He could feel the heavy stare locked onto his back, feel the judgment that always came before any words. The same question rose in his mind like a shadow he could never escape. Why me again? He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just a kid walking home. In that moment, the world suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like invisible walls were closing in around him. The quiet night felt heavy and unfair. Malik's breath turned shallow, as if the air itself had been taken away. Every memory of being treated differently rushed back every time he was watched, followed, questioned, or stared at with suspicion he didn't deserve. The empty street became a stage, and he was forced under a spotlight he never wanted. A spotlight he carried not because of who he was, but because of the color of his skin. The lights behind him grew brighter, cutting through the darkness, cutting into him. The fear wasn't new, it was familiar. Too familiar. Malik knew this night would not be simple. He knew this moment would not fade away like others. Something in the air felt heavier than usual. Something dangerous, something unfair. He felt it deep in his bones. And without a word spoken, he understood one painful truth. He was being targeted again just because he was black. The town of Ridgeway looked peaceful from the outside, almost perfect in the eyes of anyone passing through. Neatly cut lawns stood in front of quiet houses, each one painted in soft colors that made the neighborhood look calm and welcoming. Children played in the parks on sunny days, their laughter floating in the air like a promise that nothing bad ever happened here. People greeted each other with polite smiles, waved at their neighbors, and pretended that the world was always kind. But Malik knew better. Beneath the neighborhood's clean appearance lived a different story, one people chose not to see. Ridgeway was the kind of town where everyone talked about fairness, yet acted differently when no one was watching. It was a place where greetings were friendly, but glances were sharp. Where people said they didn't judge others but still held quiet expectations about who belonged and who did not. The town felt split in two, the picture-perfect surface and the hidden truth buried just under it. Malik had lived here his whole life. He knew every street, every alley, every corner where the shadows stayed a little longer. He knew which stores watched him closely when he walked in, and which sidewalks made him feel like he was being followed, even when no one was there. Ridgeway was familiar, but it never felt fully safe. Not for him. Walking through the neighborhood was like moving through two worlds at once. One world was filled with sunlight, friendly voices, and clean streets. The other world carried silent fears, unspoken rules, and quiet warnings that only some people ever felt. Malik lived between these two worlds every day, balancing himself in a place that looked peaceful but demanded caution. The school was no different. Posters on the walls talked about equality and kindness, yet Malik often felt invisible until someone wanted to question him. The teachers tried to act fair, but their eyes hesitated on him longer than on others. Students joked about things they claimed were harmless, but Malik felt each word like a small bruise. Ridgeway High was full of dreams, but not always dreams meant for him. The town didn't shout its prejudice. It whispered it. Soft enough for people to deny it existed, but loud enough for Malik to hear it every time he stepped outside. Ridgeway was beautiful on the outside, but for Malik it was a place where he had to carry strength just to walk through the day. Malik wasn't the kind of boy who looked for trouble. He was quiet, thoughtful, and always carried a certain calmness with him, like he was trying to move through the world without disturbing anything. At 16, he was taller than most boys his age, with deep brown eyes that held more worry than they should. His friends often said he had an old soul, someone who understood things even when no one explained them. He loved drawing. His notebooks were filled with sketches of places he wished he could visit someday: busy cities, peaceful beaches, and colorful markets. Art was the one place where he felt completely free. No judgment, no staring eyes, no fear, only lines, colors, and dreams. But in Ridgeway, even something as simple as dreaming sometimes felt like a risk. At school, Malik moved carefully, always aware of the world around him. Teachers praised his intelligence, but their voices carried hesitation, as if they were surprised he was capable of more than they expected. Some students treated him kindly, but others watched him like he didn't belong, like he was an outsider walking through their perfect world. Malik noticed every look, every whisper, every small moment that reminded him he was different. He didn't ask for those reminders, they simply followed him. At home, he had his biggest source of strength, his mother. She worked long hours at the hospital, yet still found time to encourage him. She told him his mind was powerful, his heart was brave, and his talent could take him far. But she also taught him caution. She taught him the rules every black boy needed to survive: how to speak softly, how to move slowly, how to avoid being misunderstood by people who didn't want to understand him. Malik understood those rules well. Too well. He never raised his voice, he never caused scenes. He tried to be invisible, even though he knew he shouldn't have to be. Still, the world had a way of reminding him that invisibility wasn't always enough. Despite everything, Malik carried a quiet determination inside him. He dreamed of a future where people judged him for his heart and his abilities, not his skin. He dreamed of going somewhere far from Ridgeway, somewhere he didn't have to walk with fear on his back. But Malik didn't know that his biggest test, a moment that would shape everything, was already on its way, and it would change him forever. Officer Brooks was a fixture in Ridgeway, as permanent and immovable as the statues in the town square. In his mid-40s, he carried himself with a stiffness that suggested he was always on duty, even when the engine of his cruiser was turned off. His uniform was always immaculate, creased sharply, badge polished to a mirror shine that reflected the sunny streets he patrolled. To the mothers pushing strollers and the shopkeepers sweeping their sidewalks, Brooks was a symbol of safety, a reassuring presence that kept their perfect little world intact. He waved at them with a practiced, tight smile, and they waved back, grateful for his vigilance. But Malik knew the other side of that vigilance. To Officer Brooks, Ridgeway was a garden that required constant tending, and he viewed boys like Malik not as flowers, but as weeds that threatened to choke the order he held so dear. He didn't see a quiet, artistic teenager with dreams of engineering. He saw a disruption. He saw a profile. Brooks operated on a set of instincts, honed by years of unchecked authority and quiet bias. He believed he could sense trouble before it happened, a gut feeling that curiously always pointed toward people who looked like Malik. He justified his harassment as proactive policing, convincing himself that by pressing down on Malik, he was preventing a future crime that existed only in his own prejudiced imagination. His weapon wasn't always his gun. Often, it was his silence. Brooks had a way of parking his patrol car just across the street from where Malik was walking, the engine idling with a low, menacing hum. He wouldn't say a word. He would just sit there, hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses, watching. That gaze felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on Malik's shoulders. It was a calculated performance designed to provoke, to make Malik nervous, to wait for a single slip-up that would justify an arrest. Brooks represented the most dangerous kind of antagonist, the one who believes he is the hero. He slept soundly at night, untroubled by the fear he instilled in a teenage boy. He walked with the confidence of a man who knew the law was on his side, and more importantly, that the town was on his side too. For Malik, Officer Brooks wasn't just a man. He was the living, breathing embodiment of the invisible walls that trapped him in Ridgeway. The central conflict of Moloch's life was not a single event, but a suffocating atmosphere that he breathed every day. It was an invisible war waged between who he actually was, a gentle, creative soul with a mind full of blueprints and skylines, and who Ridgeway decided he had to be. This tension had always hummed in the background, a low-frequency static that he tried to ignore. But after the incident with Officer Brooks, the static turned into a deafening roar. The conflict was no longer just about avoiding trouble. It was about the crushing realization that his survival required him to shrink, to silence his own voice, and to exist as a shadow in his own town. This external pressure began to fracture Moloch's internal world. He found himself pausing before raising his hand in class, wondering if his intelligence would be seen as arrogance. He hesitated before laughing too loudly with his friends in the park, calculating if their joy would be interpreted as a disturbance. The conflict wasn't just man versus man, Malik versus Brooks. It was Malik versus the weight of an entire system designed to keep him in a specific, narrow box. Officer Brooks was merely the gatekeeper of that box, the physical manifestation of a prejudice that was woven into the very sidewalks of Ridgeway. The tragedy of this conflict lay in its unfairness. Moloch was fighting a battle he never signed up for. He wanted to worry about calculus exams, art projects, and college applications. Instead, he was forced to worry about survival strategies, how to stand, where to look, how to keep his hands visible. The energy he should have been pouring into his dreams was being siphoned off by his anxiety. He felt the unfairness of it burning in his chest like a fever. Why did he have to carry this burden? Why was his existence treated as a question that needed answering, while his peers lived freely as exclamation points? As the days passed, the conflict sharpened. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the birth of a quiet, simmering anger. Malik began to see the cracks in the perfect town of Ridgeway more clearly than ever. He realized that staying silent, as his mother had taught him for his own safety, was becoming harder to sustain. The silence felt heavy, like it was crushing his spirit. The central struggle had shifted from simply navigating the streets to navigating his own soul. Could he continue to play the role of the invisible, obedient boy, or would the pressure eventually force him to break the mold, risking everything to reclaim his own identity? The storm inside him was gathering strength, and Ridgeway was not ready for what would happen when it finally broke. The incident with the flashing lights was not an anomaly. It was the opening note of a grim symphony. In the weeks that followed, what Malik had hoped was a random encounter solidified into a calculated routine. Officer Brooks was no longer just a figure in the background. He became a constant, suffocating shadow in Malik's daily life. It started with small things: a patrol car slowing to a crawl whenever Malik walked to the bus stop, the engine purring like a mechanical beast marking its territory. Then came the lingering pauses at intersections where Malik stood, Brooks's head turning slowly, his gaze fixed and heavy, stripping away Malik's sense of privacy and peace. The targeting wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of harassment that made the evening news or caused neighbors to gasp in horror. It was quiet, insidious, and designed to be invisible to everyone but the victim. Brooks would park across the street from the local library when he knew Malik was inside studying. He would show up at the park where Malik sketched, standing just close enough to be seen, arms crossed. Watching, it was a form of psychological warfare. Brooks was planting a seed of paranoia in Malik's mind, making him question every step he took. Am I walking too fast? Are my hands visible? Is my hoodie up? Malik found himself self-correcting behaviors that didn't need correcting, shrinking himself to fit into a space that Brooks kept making smaller. The impact on Malik was devastating. The safe bubbles of his life, his sketchpad, his walk home, his time with friends were being punctured one by one. He began to avoid certain streets, taking longer, winding routes home just to escape the possibility of seeing that cruiser. His sketches, once filled with vibrant cities and open skies, began to change. Darker lines appeared, heavy shading that reflected the anxiety tightening his chest. He stopped hanging out at the park, retreating instead to the safety of his bedroom. The only place where he didn't feel the phantom weight of Brooks's stare. What made it worse was the isolation. To the outside world, nothing was happening. He's just doing his job. People would say if Malik ever dared to complain. He's just keeping the neighborhood safe. But Malik knew the difference between protection and predation. He felt the specific, cold intent behind Brooks's actions. It was a pattern woven from the threads of systemic bias, a silent message repeated day after day. You do not belong here. I am watching you. One wrong move, and I will have you. The pressure was building, turning Malik's quiet life into a cage, and he was running out of room to breathe. The war wasn't just happening on the streets of Ridgeway. The most violent battles were being fought inside Malik's own mind. Before Officer Brooks began his silent campaign of surveillance, Malik had known exactly who he was. He was an artist. He was a thinker. He was a son who made his mother laugh. But now, looking in the mirror, the reflection staring back seemed fractured, distorted by the relentless pressure of being watched. He felt like he was wearing a mask that was slowly fusing to his skin, a mask of absolute, paralyzing caution. This internal struggle manifested in a suffocating self-censorship. Malik began to police himself more strictly than Brooks ever could. In the cafeteria, he stopped laughing loudly, fearing it would be seen as rowdy. In class, he stopped challenging ideas, terrified that passion would be misinterpreted as aggression. He was dismantling his own personality, brick by brick, hoping that if he made himself small enough, boring enough, and quiet enough, the target on his back would disappear. But the shrinking didn't bring safety. It only brought shame. He hated himself for the fear that made his hands shake when he reached for his backpack. He hated that he felt grateful just to make it home without incident, as if existing freely was a privilege he hadn't earned. His art, once his sanctuary, became a casualty of this internal war. When he sat down to draw, the skylines and futuristic bridges didn't come. Instead, his pencil hovered over the paper, paralyzed by a creative block born of anxiety. How could he dream of building new worlds when he felt trapped in this one? The vibrant colors he used to love felt wrong now, too loud for a boy trying to be invisible. His sketchbook remained closed, a silent testament to the joy that was being stolen from him. The isolation was the hardest part. He wanted to scream, to tell his friends, to cry to his mother, but he swallowed the words every time. He didn't want to worry his mother, who already carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. He didn't want to be the angry black kid to his white friends who might not understand the nuance of his terror. So, he carried the storm alone. He lay awake at night, the ceiling fan spinning above him like the wheels of a police cruiser, asking himself the most painful question of all. Was he slowly becoming the threat they thought he was, simply by letting their fear consume him? The Malik who dreamed of engineering was fading, replaced by a Malik who only engineered ways to survive the day. Ridgeway High School was meant to be a refuge, a place where intelligence and effort mattered more than appearance. But for Malik, it was just another stage where the town's quiet biases played out, often subtly, but sometimes with a harsh public clarity. The constant surveillance by Officer Brooks had already frayed his nerves, and now, that same skepticism began to bleed into the brightly lit hallways and classrooms. The external conflict erupted not in a physical fight, but in a confrontation over his very potential. The incident occurred during his advanced physics class. Malik, despite his recent creative block, was still fiercely dedicated to engineering. He had spent weeks developing a theoretical design for a sustainable water purification system, a complex project that demanded deep knowledge of fluid dynamics. When it was his turn to present, he spoke with the rare passion that he usually reserved only for his sketchbook, pouring out his hopes for a solution that could genuinely help people. For a few minutes, he was just Malik, the aspiring engineer, free from the shadow of the police cruiser. But when he finished, the silence was different. It wasn't awe. It was doubt. Mr. Davies, the teacher, cleared his throat with an overly loud sound. "Malik, that's remarkably intricate," he said, the word remarkably loaded with suspicion. "The mathematics here are exceptionally advanced. Can you walk us through your sources again? Did you happen to find a specialized online forum for this exact prototype? The question was posed politely, but the subtext was brutal. Did you steal this? Did someone else do this for you? The implication hung in the air. Malik was capable of many things, but not this kind of complex, high-level thought. The blood rushed to Malik's face. The dismissal was instant, public, and shattering. It was the same judgment he saw in Officer Brooks's eyes, the automatic assumption of guilt and incompetence. He felt the weight of every stereotype in the room crash down on him. The conflict was immediately clear. His genuine effort was being invalidated by a perception based solely on his skin color. His classmates shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding his eyes, others staring with renewed, stereotyping curiosity. In that moment, the internal conflict from the night before exploded into external reality. Malik didn't back down. He pointed to the board, his voice steady despite the furious tremor in his hands. He didn't just cite his sources. He broke down the process of his calculation, step by step, equation by equation, forcing Mr. Davies to acknowledge the sheer intellectual labor involved. He stood up for his mind in the face of institutional doubt, realizing that if he let this slide, he would be conceding victory to the prejudice that haunted his streets and his schools. The tension was suffocating, and though he won the intellectual argument, the emotional battle left him more exposed, and more determined, than ever before. Systemic racism didn't show itself in one big moment. It appeared in the small, steady ways that shaped Malik's everyday life. It was there in the tired look on his mother's face when she came home from work, knowing she worked twice as hard for half the credit. It was there in the way store owners watched Malik whenever he walked in, their eyes following him like he was a threat, instead of a teenager just looking for snacks. These little moments stacked up like invisible weights he carried on his shoulders. In school, Malik noticed how the teachers treated certain students differently. Kids who looked like him were often told to calm down, sit still, or watch their attitude, even when they hadn't done anything wrong. Meanwhile, others got second chances, excuses, and soft smiles. Malik learned early that for some people, his skin color spoke before he could. It said things he never meant, things he never was. The community around him carried the scars of these unspoken rules. Broken streetlights stayed broken for months. Parks had rusted swings and faded benches. Police cars passed through slowly, lights off, eyes alert, not protecting, but patrolling. When something went wrong in the neighborhood, people expected blame before they expected help. And Officer Brooks was always the first one to judge. Malik began to see the pattern clearly. The system wasn't built to lift kids like him, it was built to limit them. Opportunities seemed distant, almost unreachable, like they belonged to someone else. It wasn't that Malik lacked talent or drive. It was that doors remained closed long before he even knew they existed. Everyone talked about hard work and equal chances. But Malik realized equality was a story people liked to tell, not something everyone lived. One moment hit him harder than the rest. During a school assembly, scholarship names were announced. Malik had worked harder than ever, turning in perfect assignments and staying after class. But the award went to someone with lower grades but a more polished family background. Malik felt the sting of unfairness, clawing at his confidence. For the first time, he wondered if the world would ever see him for who he truly was. But even as he saw the injustice clearly, Malik didn't break. Instead, he felt something new rising inside him, a determination to prove that his value was not defined by a broken system. He wouldn't let society's limits become his own. In that moment, Malik made a silent promise: he would rise above every barrier placed in front of him. The turning point came on a warm Saturday afternoon. When Malik stepped into Carter's convenience store, a small corner shop he had visited countless times. The sun was bright outside, shining through the glass windows, but inside, the air felt unusually heavy. Malik entered quietly, headphones around his neck, planning to buy a simple sports drink after basketball practice. He had no idea his life was about to change. As soon as he walked in, the store owner, Mr. Carter, lifted his head sharply. His eyes narrowed, following Malik's every move. Malik noticed the shift instantly. He moved slowly, trying not to draw attention, but each step felt like crossing a minefield. He reached the fridge and grabbed a bottle of blue energy drinks, the same one he always bought. But today, everything felt different. Behind him, Mr. Carter's voice cut the silence like a blade. "Hey, you don't try anything funny." Malik froze. His chest tightened as he turned around, confused. "I'm just getting a drink," he said, but his voice came out softer than he wanted. Mr. Carter stepped closer, suspicion thick in his eyes. "I know your type. I've seen kids like you steal before." The words hit harder than a punch. Malik felt heat rising to his face and gar, shame, disbelief mixing all at once. He lifted the bottle slightly. "I always pay," he whispered, fighting to keep calm. But before he could walk to the counter, the bell above the door rang again. Officer Brooks entered, the last person Malik wanted to see. One glance from Mr. Carter was enough. "That boy was acting suspicious," the shopkeeper said quickly. Brooks didn't ask for proof. He didn't check the cameras. He simply walked toward Malik with authority that pressed down on the entire store. Malik didn't move. He stood perfectly still, hands visible, heart pounding. "What's in your pockets?" Brooks demanded. "Nothing, just my wallet," Malik replied, lifting his hands slowly, just like he'd been taught. But Brooks grabbed his arm anyway, turning him around. The store fell silent, except for the sound of Malik's heart beating in his ears. The officer searched him right there, in the middle of the store, under bright fluorescent lights. While Mr. Carter watched with folded arms as if expecting Malik to magically pull stolen goods from thin air. When Brooks found nothing, he didn't apologize. He just muttered, "Be careful where you walk," and left. Malik stood there, humiliated and shaken. He had done nothing wrong, yet he felt like a criminal. And he knew this moment, this incident, was only the beginning of something much bigger. Malik stepped out of the store with his heart racing, his hands shaking so badly that he could barely hold the drink he had just been accused of stealing. The cool air outside did nothing to calm the heat rising in his chest. Every step felt heavy, every breath uneven. He walked until he reached the empty basketball court near his neighborhood, a place that once felt like home, now feeling foreign, distant, unsafe. As he dropped onto the old wooden bench, the weight of the entire world seemed to fall at once. The humiliation from the store incident replayed in his mind like a cruel loop, the whispering customers, the suspicious eyes, the store owner's accusing tone, and Officer Brooks stepping toward him like he had already decided Malik was guilty. Malik tried to swallow the pain, but this time, it wouldn't stay down. His chest tightened, his eyes burned, and suddenly, the tears he had been holding for months finally broke free. For the first time in a long while, Malik let himself feel everything he had forced himself to ignore: the frustration of always being watched, the fear of walking home at night, the comments he pretended not to hear at school, the teachers who looked surprised when he excelled, and the people who crossed the street when they saw him coming. It wasn't just the store incident, it was every moment leading up to it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, palms covering his face. His breath trembled as the tears kept falling. This wasn't just sadness. It was exhaustion, deep, bone-tired exhaustion from carrying the weight of being misunderstood every single day. He felt small, powerless, and unbearably alone. But somewhere inside that pain, a small spark flickered. Anger, not the kind that destroys, this was the kind that awakens. As Malik wiped his face, a new thought formed, quiet but fierce. I can't stay silent anymore. He remembered his mother's words about using his voice, not hiding his truth. He remembered the kids in his neighborhood who looked up to him. He remembered the unfairness of the store, not as an isolated moment, but as a symbol of a bigger fight. His tears slowed. His breathing steadied. The breakdown had cracked something open. And through that crack, determination began to rise. What happened today wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a voice he was finally ready to use. The sun was setting, but Malik felt like the day had already stolen all the light from his life. After the store incident, whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. People he had never spoken to were suddenly staring at him like they already knew his story, like it was written on his skin. But the worst part wasn't the rumors. It was the feeling that something else was coming, something heavier, something final. And he was right. Officer Brooks had been circling the neighborhood for days, driving slowly past the basketball court, the school, even Malik's street. Every time his car appeared, Malik felt the same cold shiver crawl up his spine. It wasn't fear anymore. It was exhaustion from always being watched, always being judged, always being one wrong move away from being labeled dangerous. On the night it happened, Malik was simply walking home from practice, backpack slung over his shoulder, jersey still damp with sweat. The streetlights flickered softly, and the warm wind carried the smell of distant barbecues. It should have been a normal walk. But for Malik, normal didn't exist anymore. As he turned the corner, Officer Brooks' cruiser screeched to a halt in front of him. The headlights flooded Malik's face, blinding him. Brooks stepped out with the same expression he always carried, the one that looked at Malik like he was a problem that needed solving. "There he is," Brooks muttered as if he had been hunting something dangerous. Malik froze. His heartbeat thundered in his chest, but he kept his hands visible. He remembered everything his mother ever told him about staying alive during encounters like this. But this time, no amount of calm could save him from being targeted. Brooks approached him fast, hand already hovering near his weapon. "Empty your bag." "For what?" Malik asked quietly, voice trembling but steady. Brooks smirked, chilling, calculated smirk. "We received a report. You fit the description." The same words black kids had heard for generations. The same words that turned innocence into guilt. Malik slowly lowered his backpack. His mind raced not with fear, but with realization. This wasn't about suspicion. This wasn't about justice. This was personal. This was the moment Brooks had been waiting for. The final targeting. Malik knew that whatever happened next would change everything. Maybe even break him. But deep inside, something new began to grow, a spark that refused to die, even under the weight of injustice. The rain was a cold, steady curtain that night, mirroring the deep anxiety settling over Malik. He had just finished tutoring Kevin, a nervous 8th grader who lived 5 blocks past the park. Clutching his worn backpack tighter, Malik focused on the sound of the rain hitting the slick pavement, trying to drown out the growing knot of dread in his stomach. He was doing everything right, helping a kid, staying off the main roads, being home before his mother woke up for her shift, yet the familiar, sickening tension was back. And then, the sudden, violent rupture of the night, the harsh glare of headlights slamming into his face, blinding him against the darkness. The cruiser didn't just slow, it swerved sharply to cut him off, tires splashing a cold sheet of water onto the curb. It was Officer Brooks. Brooks exited the vehicle with a practiced, aggressive urgency that had become terrifyingly familiar to Malik. The officer's raincoat glistened under the flashing blue and red lights, making him seem impossibly large and ominous in the downpour. "Hold up right there, kid," Brooks barked, his voice amplified by the rain. He didn't ask Malik's name. He didn't need to. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for. Turn around and put your hands on your head. Now." His tone carried zero room for negotiation, a hostile command that sliced through the gentle patter of the falling water. Malik felt a wave of nausea, quickly replaced by pure, cold fear. "Not again. Not now," he pleaded silently. He tried to keep his voice steady, remembering his mother's frantic whispered advice. "Yes, sir, but I was just walking home from tutoring." "Save it, I don't care about your homework," Brooks snapped, his face set in an expression of self-righteous suspicion. "Looks like a bag on your back, looks like a hoodie on your head. That's enough for me." Before Malik could protest further, the cold, steel metal snapped around his wrists, tight and immediate. The physical discomfort was sharp, but the humiliation was worse. He was searched roughly right there on the wet street. The officer's movements violating his personal space, treating him as fundamentally guilty. Passers-by, ghostly shapes behind their foggy car windows slowed down to stare, confirming his assumed criminality. Handcuffed, Malik looked down at his soaked shoes, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, helpless drumming against the sound of the rain. The familiar fear of being targeted had finally escalated into the terrifying reality of being detained. In that single, brutalizing moment, under the harsh, flashing lights, the cumulative weight of every slight, every suspicion, and every act of injustice reached its sickening, undeniable breaking point. The rain had eased, leaving puddles that reflected the dim streetlights as Malik stood trembling, cuffs still snug around his wrists. But something had changed. The camera in the neighbor's hands wasn't just a lens, it was a mirror reflecting the truth that had long been buried beneath assumptions and fear. Malik realized that what people had been willing to ignore or dismiss for years could now be seen clearly, captured in undeniable detail. Officer Brooks shifted uncomfortably, sensing the growing scrutiny. For the first time, his confident facade faltered. The murmurs of neighbors swelled into whispered conversations. People who had looked away suddenly met Malik's gaze, seeing not a criminal, but a young man whose only crime was existing in a body that society had deemed suspicious. Malik's voice, steady now, narrated the pattern of harassment he had endured. The repeated stops, the whispered accusations at school, the humiliation in front of strangers at the store. His words carried weight, amplified by the recording that captured every inflection, every pause heavy with emotion. The community, forced to confront the reality, began asking questions they had never considered. Why did we look the other way? Some whispered, others expressed guilt for not protecting him sooner. Malik's mother arrived, worry etched across her face, but pride shone through her tears. She had lived through the same fear and silence, and now her son's courage validated everything she had warned him about. The local news picked up the story within hours. Brooks' record was scrutinized. Complaints that had previously vanished into paperwork surfaced, undeniable in light of the video. The truth, once hidden in plain sight, became impossible to ignore. Malik's experience sparked conversations, heated debates, and community meetings that demanded accountability. No longer could the system's biases be casually dismissed. The young black teen who had once wondered if he was the problem realized the problem had never been him, it had been the prejudice, the assumptions, the silence. In this moment, Malik understood the power of truth, courage, and visibility. He had transformed his pain into a force that illuminated injustice, challenging not only Brooks but an entire community to reflect, confront, and change. Though the road ahead was uncertain, Malik now carried the unwavering belief that when the truth is revealed, justice, even if delayed, can begin to take root. The morning after the incident, the town seemed different. Sunlight poured through the streets, highlighting familiar buildings that now felt unfamiliar in the light of truth. Malik walked to school with a sense of quiet pride. He no longer carried the weight of invisible judgment alone. Conversations had shifted overnight. Neighbors who once averted their eyes now greeted him with hesitant smiles. Some offering apologies, others simply acknowledging his courage with a nod. The story of his ordeal, amplified by the video, had ignited a spark of awareness that was impossible to ignore. At school, teachers began questioning their own biases. Some called meetings to discuss how assumptions about students could be harmful. Malik noticed a change in how classmates interacted with him. Whispers of suspicion were replaced with cautious curiosity, and eventually, genuine friendship. The administration, pressured by the community and local media, implemented training programs to educate staff and students about racial bias and its subtle effects. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a start, a visible commitment to change that had previously seemed unimaginable. Community meetings, once routine and perfunctory, now bristled with honest dialogue. Residents shared experiences, some admitting complicity through silence, others offering support to Malik and other affected families. Local organizations launched initiatives to create safe spaces for dialogue between law enforcement and residents. Officer Brooks, under scrutiny and public pressure, was required to attend bias awareness programs. The The system that had allowed discrimination to fester quietly was now being forced to reckon with itself, if only in small, deliberate steps. Malik's mother, watching her son walk confidently down the street, felt a mix of relief and pride. She had feared that her warnings and protection would never be enough, but seeing Malik transform his pain into advocacy and resilience reassured her that change, though slow, was possible. Malik himself understood that this was not the end of challenges. Systemic issues ran deep, but he had discovered his voice and the power of community accountability. In this new chapter, the town began to redefine itself. What had been a quiet, unspoken tension was now an active conversation about justice, empathy, and awareness. Malik's courage had catalyzed transformation, showing that even a single voice, when heard, could inspire change. The street where he once felt trapped by fear was now a space of possibility. And the reflections in the puddles, once symbols of isolation, now mirrored hope, resilience, and the promise of a better, more just community. The months following the incident were transformative for Malik. The fear and frustration that had once defined his days gradually gave way to confidence and purpose. No longer the quiet teen shrinking under scrutiny, he embraced a newfound sense of self-worth, understanding that his identity and dreams were not defined by the prejudices of others. Each step he took, whether walking to school or engaging in community events, carried the weight of experience but also the lightness of resilience. At school, Malik became more assertive. He asked questions in class, challenged assumptions respectfully, and even helped classmates understand the subtle ways bias could affect everyday interactions. Teachers who had once underestimated him began recognizing his dedication, intelligence, and leadership potential. Academic success was no longer just a personal goal, it became a tool to inspire others. To show that determination and integrity could overcome systemic barriers. Malik's relationship with his mother deepened. She had always been his anchor, and now their bond grew stronger as they shared strategies for coping with adversity and supporting the community. Malik started mentoring younger students, especially those who had quietly experienced discrimination. By guiding them, he discovered that teaching and leading gave him a sense of agency he had never felt before. Each student he helped reminded him that change was possible when courage met action. Emotionally, Malik learned to process his feelings constructively. The journal he once used to confine his fears became a space for reflection and goal-setting. He wrote about resilience, empathy, and the kind of world he wanted to live in. Through writing and dialogue, he transformed anger into understanding, fear into proactive engagement. Malik realized that personal growth was not only about self-improvement but also about empowering others and contributing to a broader change. By the end of the year, Malik had become a recognized figure in his community. His voice, once silenced by repeated targeting, now resonated with authority and compassion. He had learned to navigate challenges with courage, to confront injustice without losing his humanity, and to inspire hope in others. The once timid teenager had evolved into a young man who understood the value of perseverance, the power of truth, and the responsibility that came with knowledge and empathy. Malik's personal growth was a testament to resilience, proof that even in the face of systemic adversity, one individual's strength and integrity could create ripples of lasting impact. The weeks following the viral video became a turning point, not only for Malik, but for the entire community. What had once been whispered about behind closed doors was now impossible to ignore. The pressure from residents, media coverage, and civil rights groups brought the town's leadership into action. For the first time, formal investigations were launched into Officer Brooks' conduct and action many believed would never happen in their quiet town. The Internal Affairs Department reviewed years of Brooks' stops, warnings, and complaints. Patterns that had been hidden under paperwork and protected by silence were now laid bare. Former victims stepped forward, their voices trembling but firm. Their stories matched Malik's stories of humiliation, intimidation, and fear. The weight of their testimonies began to crack the foundation of the authority Brooks had long misused. Town hall meetings became crowded with residents demanding transparency and reform. Some defended Brooks, insisting he had been just doing his job, but their voices were overshadowed by the growing call for justice. The mayor issued a public statement acknowledging the need for change, while the police chief, once reluctant, was forced to address the inconsistencies in Brooks' record. Finally, after weeks of investigation, the department announced its decision. Officer Brooks was suspended pending further disciplinary action and removed from patrol duties. For the first time, Malik felt seen not as a suspect, but as a citizen whose rights mattered. The announcement did not erase the pain he had endured, but it marked the beginning of a long-awaited shift. Legal advocates offered Malik and his family support, ensuring the incident would be documented officially so it could not be buried. The community, now more aware of systemic issues, pushed for new policies, body cameras, bias training, and anonymous reporting channels. These changes were slow, often met with resistance, but they represented real, measurable progress. Malik watched the changes unfold with a mixture of relief and maturity. Justice, he realized, was not a single moment. It was a process layered, imperfect, but necessary. Accountability did not erase the trauma, but it validated his experience and protected others who might have faced the same fate. In the end, Malik understood something powerful. Justice wasn't just about punishing one man, it was about transforming a system. His courage had unlocked a truth that could no longer be denied, and through that truth, an entire community had taken its first steps toward fairness, dignity, and lasting change. As Malik stood beneath the warm glow of the late afternoon sun, he felt the weight of everything he had endured: fear, humiliation, anger, and finally, awakening. The path he had walked was painful, yet it had brought him to a place of truth and strength he never imagined. He looked around at the town that once felt like a cage. Now, it felt like a fragile beginning, still flawed, still learning, but finally willing to see. Malik realized that every person who watched his struggle had learned something, even if quietly. Some learned about the dangers of silence. Some learned that prejudice didn't always appear loudly, it lived in glances, assumptions, and unspoken fears. And some learned that courage could come from the most unexpected places: a trembling voice, a moment of resistance, a step taken even while afraid. For Malik, the message was clear. Pain had shaped him, but it hadn't broken him. Instead, it had taught him that every story, even the quiet ones, deserved to be heard. Every young person who felt unseen or underestimated deserved the chance to rise, to be recognized, to walk through their community without fear. He thought of the younger kids he now mentored, kids who looked at him not with pity, but with respect. They saw not just a survivor, but a leader. And in their eyes, Malik saw a future he wanted to protect, a future more just, more compassionate, more aware. Standing on the same street where he had once been handcuffed and humiliated, Malik whispered words meant not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You matter. Those words, simple yet powerful, became the message he carried into every conversation, every meeting, every moment of his life. Malik understood that change didn't come all at once. It came in waves: small acts of bravery, small sparks of awareness, small shifts in hearts and minds. And if enough people chose courage over silence, light over shadow, truth over comfort, the waves could become a tide. His final emotional message to the world was not about anger or revenge, but about healing. It was about standing tall even when the world tried to shrink you. It was about believing in justice even when it felt distant. It was about holding on to hope, because hope was the one thing no one could take away. And as Malik walked forward, he carried that message like a rising sun, bright, unbroken, and full of promise.